Hello, my name is Robert Higginbotham, and in this video I'll be following and expanding on Assess tutorials 4 and 5. The objectives of these tutorials is to produce a texture for the retro arcade cabinet using the exported UV map from the previous video. I'll then test this texture on the model in 3ds Max before importing into Unreal Engine and applying it as a material. Once again, for this video I'll begin by following along with the guided tutorial using the low poly version of the model. I'll then move on to texturing the more detailed version of the model using my own textures. So we're going to start out in Adobe Photoshop and we're going to create a new file. We're going to go 2048 by 2048 pixels, RGB colour, and we're going to go 16-bit. I'm going to keep the black background because that'll save me some hassle shortly, and we're going to hit create. Okay, and now we've got this open, we're going to go into File, and we're going to Open, and we're going to go to the Template Arcade Machine, this one, for this model, and we're going to open this. And now that we've got this, we're going to marquee select and Control C to copy. Then we'll jump back over into the file we've created and Control V to paste that in. Now we can get rid of this now. So what we're going to do now is double click on the background layer and hit OK. And that's turned the background layer into an alterable layer. And we're going to double click the name here and rename this to UVW template. We're now going to create a new layer at the top of the stack, and we're going to rename this yellow. Now I've been provided with images with this tutorial that we're going to be using to texture the model, and we have a reference image here. We'll just work our way to it here, and the yellow is going to be for the main body colour of the sides of the arcade machine. Just pull this out of the way. Now the tutorial guides me to use the marquee select to texture the parts of the model here, but because of how I've laid out the UVs, that's not going to be possible. We'll have overlapping textures. So instead, what I'm going to do is use Alt and the mouse wheel on my keyboard. I'm going to use the pen tool, and I'm going to just draw in these lines myself around the model. And now that I have that as an enclosed border, I'm going to select a yellow colour, somewhere like that, and then I'm going to right click, I'm going to fill path with the foreground colour, 100% opacity, and hit OK. Now I do have, I've switched to the move tool here, I do have 3ds Max open alongside this, and in here I'm able to select polygon and pick on the model the areas that we know are going to be black, and that highlights those areas in the UV unwrap, and we can use that to guide us in Photoshop so that we know which areas to paint black on the model. It was quite obvious with the sides, they're quite a distinct shape, they've got that silhouette. But for the rest of the model, it's mostly boxes, and it's helpful to know what we're texturing the right colours. I think we'll just turn the entirety of the bottom black. We haven't got any references of the bottom. So I'm going to keep this on a separate monitor, but for while I'm working in the Photoshop document, this is how I know which areas I'm going to be texturing which. Now back over in Photoshop. Since black is the predominant colour in the scene, I'm going to take the layer 0, which we've already set to be black, and I'm going to duplicate the layer, and I'm just going to name this black. I'm then going to drag that between the UVW template and the yellow layer. And on here I'm just going to set the opacity just low enough so that we can still see what's going on beneath. I'm going to do the same for the yellow. So the next thing we're going to work on is the red for the trims. So we're going to create another layer. We'll make sure it's at the top of the stack. We're going to call this red. So I'm now going to go around the model using 3ds Max as a reference, and we're going to double click on the swatch and we'll set this to red. It's okay. I'm going to select each of the areas that need to be red and fill them with the paint bucket tool. Okay, and that's all of the areas that need to be red, painted red. So I'm going to set the opacity on this a little bit lower so that we can see through that too. Just so we can get a good idea of what's going on beneath with the UV map. Now that we have the red in, we have all of the colours for the flat body of the arcade machine. Let's just see if we can delete path. There we go. Okay, so now what we want to do is pull over the images and drag on the decals for the side of the model. And we're going to scale this down a bit and try to position it dead centre in the arcade machine. I'm going to give it a little bit more size, I think, than what the tutorial does, just because of where it sits on the reference. I'd like it to sit at a good position. And I'm going to duplicate this layer, side copy, and go to move. I'm just going to move this over to the left. I'm not going to click and drag, I'm just going to use left on the keyboard. It's a little bit slower, but it does guarantee that this is the exact same height as the other image on the opposing side. Just going to zoom in a little just to make sure we've got that pretty even. Yeah, that looks evenly spaced. So with the decals in place, now I'm going to select the yellow layer and turn the opacity back up again. I'm going to double click in the swatch and sample the yellow from the decal and hit OK. And I'm going to use the paint bucket tool. I'm just going to paint that the same yellow to blend that in. Now, pulling in the reference, for the front of the arcade machine, we don't actually have the decals provided. We have the marquee that goes at the top, and this is using a different colour variation, and Pac-Man Plus isn't included, so the one that's being used by the tutorial is this Pac-Man logo. So what we're going to do is drag that in, and we'll bring it up to the top of the stack so that we can see everything that's going on. And we're going to just move this into position, and this is the front facing segment of the arcade machine. So we're going to scale this down until it fits nicely within that space. I think closer to the top, maybe there, is a good fit. Just going to have to zoom in a little so that I can get this centered well. I'll just use the keyboard so it doesn't keep snapping to things. Okay, I'm done. So next we're going to drag in the marquee for the front. I'm just going to scale this down a little. Just pop that corner into there on the front facing panel. Sit there around about there. And using the reference, that does have a white background, so what I'm going to do is take the layer below that, add a new layer. I'm going to call this white. Just going to use the marquee select tool and take this square in the centre. And we'll set that to white with the paint bucket tool, like that. Control D to deselect that. Now the next part that we're going to work on is the bezel around the screen, which is this part down here, which is going to be quite tricky because the scaling is very definitely off compared to the image that we're trying to apply to it. This is of course a consideration that should be made while modelling and also while creating the textures, depending on the workflow. But we're going to do the best that we can with this. So first of all, I'm going to drag this to the top of the stack, and I'm going to drop the opacity a little just so I can see what's going on beneath it. Then going to line up with the bottom corner. We're going to overwrite the red in here. Just inch that over a little. And then we'll shrink it down until it's against the other edge of the face there. Around about there. Now we're going to turn the opacity back up on here, right click on the layer, and we're going to rasterize the layer there. Now with the layer rasterized, I'm going to again drop the opacity so I can see what's going on there, and I'm going to hold shift and scale this down to fit closer with what we're working with here. Just zoom in again a little bit. Holding shift again and scale the image just that little bit so that it fully fills the UV there. And as you can see, this still doesn't fit. So we're going to need to use the marquee tool and slice this image up a bit to make it fit. So I'll start off by taking one of these sides out. I'm going to right click and layer via cut. Just make sure that the opacity still works with that before I continue. Now with this new layer, I'm going to call this Bears Left. And I'm going to, again, using Shift on the keyboard, scale this in until it fits. Now this is of course going to cause some stretching in the texture, and it's not the best solution, but it's the best we can do given the circumstance. Now we're going to go back to the main image, marquee select, and we're going to take this side off. Layer via cut, call this Bears Right, just so we know what we're working with in the stack. It's easy to find things again. Once again, holding Shift on the keyboard, we're just going to drag this until it fits within the space we want it. And then we can take the Pac-Man bezel, we will cut again, I think, just so that we're working with nicer spaces. If I take, let's say, this part and we'll again layer via cut, Bears top, because we're going to shrink this down a little bit more than necessary to fit within that space. Let's see if we can bring the scale down this way a touch and then extend it back out. That might give us a touch more detail there. We'll raise it up, drag it to the centre, and about there. I'll take the Pac-Man bezel again. I'm just going to take this little strip of dots here, layer via cut, Bears underscore dots will do for now. And then we're just going to slide that on up there. Then we'll take the original Pac-Man bezel and we will delete the layer. Yep. Because any of the details that were left from all of those cuts, now they're gone. We've only kept the selections that we made. We'll then select all of these layers for the bezel and we will merge the layers and call this bezel. Just backtracking a little there, we're actually going to Control Z and undo the merge of those layers, because we actually want to turn the opacity up to full on those again before we merge them. Now we merge the layers and we rename it bezel. And now if we want to, we can drop the opacity again just so that we can see what's going on behind everything, because we'll go through and check to make sure all the opacities are set to 100 before we export this as texture. Now the next thing we're going to do, which I'm pretty sure is the final thing, is we're going to add the decals over where the controls should sit. And that is this face here. Just drag in the decal. We'll scale it down for now. And I've checked using the texture checker in 3ds Max, so the orientation is 90 degrees this way. Sit that into the space, drag it down, we could even use Shift on the keyboard to stretch this out to fill the extent of the area. And final piece, almost forgot about it, is the screen. So we're going to pull in the decal for the screen. There we go, we've got the image in there. Just going to scale this right down now. I'm actually going to drop the opacity on this as well, so that we can see what we're aligning to. Bring this in as much as we can get it on the right side. Then we'll use Shift on the keyboard and drag the bottom into place. Could even to make more use out of the space, trim this up a little, something like that. Can I not layer via cut? Do I need to rasterize the layer? Now I'll layer via cut and just delete the original image there, and use Shift on the keyboard and just drag this into place. Yeah, and that'll make better use of the screen space, I feel. Now with that done, we're going to zoom back out and frame this back up so we can see what we're looking at clearly. Hit the tick up here. Now we're going to set all of these opacities back to 100. Like that. Now, I'm not sure if it will pick up in the video, but there is a slight colour difference in the black of the Pac-Man decal background here and the black that we have. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the black layer, we're going to come into here and just sample that black, hit hit OK. And I'm going to use the paint bucket tool and just paint the layer. Not entirely sure why that's not working. It's because the opacity is so low. It has worked. That's my fault. And there we have it. That's the texture prepared. Now that we've reached this stage, we're going to go to File and Save As. And once we've found where we want to save it, we're going to give it a name. Arcade Machine Texture. Save it as a PSD file so that we've got it for when we need it. We can always come back and modify that. And then we're going to go File, Export, Export, Quick Export PNG. And again, where once we've found somewhere that we're going to save it, we can save it. I'm just going to call this T_arcade machine, the T being for texture, just because we know that we're going to be using this in Unreal Engine. We want to prefix it correctly. And we're going to hit save. So now that we have that done, we're going to go back into 3ds Max. I'll just bring my map over here because we're going to be closing that. We're going to jump into the... because I've changed screens, all of my sizing's messed up. There we go, just fix that so I can see everything again. That's better. So we're going to select Unwrap UVW and Collapse again, just so that we're working with the model as it is. Now we're going to hit M on the keyboard to get the material editor. And we're going to drag out a PB metallic roughness here. We're then going to go out of base colour here, drag out, go general and bitmap. And we want to search for the base colour texture that we created, the T_arcade machine. We're going to hit open on that. Okay, now we want to show shaded and viewport, and just double check we've got the model selected there. We'll select the material and we will apply to the model. We can now close the material editor and we can see the textures applied to the model in 3ds Max here. Just going to look at the back here too, underneath. We could even change out to standard and go high quality, just so that we're looking at the shadows as well. Just for that bit of extra detail, but we can of course make this look better when we move it into Unreal Engine and we start applying materials. Nice, we'll switch that back into default shading. And we're going to prepare move this over into Unreal Engine now. So what we want to do is go into File and export this. And once we have a location that we want to save it, we're going to give it a name, so Arcade Cabinet Assess Tutorial 2. Yeah, that'll do. I'll give it the SM at the start. Just for static mesh, so I know it's not an animation file. Okay, so just going to hit save on that. Want to make sure that smoothing groups is ticked. And we're going to hit OK. So with that exported, we're now going to jump over into Unreal. So I've just created a new project on Unreal Engine for the arcade scene. And I'm going to start by just dragging in the texture that we've created. And we're going to drag in the FBX. Quick read down this list. I'm pretty sure everything by default will be fine because it's only a model. So I'm just going to hit import. and that's give us a material. We don't want that, so we're going to delete that. We're now going to make a folder and call it mesh, and that's where the arcade cabinet will go. We're going to create a folder and call it material, well, materials. I'm going to throw the texture into there for a moment, go into materials and make another folder and call this textures. The texture can go in there, and we want to create a material. We'll call this m_arcade machine. So with the material created, we're going to open that up. Zoom out to give ourselves a little bit of space to see. And out of base colour, we want to search for a texture sample. And we're going to get a texture object. And then for the texture, we're going to search for T underscore, called it arcade machine, I feel, or just double check what the naming was for that. Base arcade machine, that's why. So, back into the texture object, going to search for T underscore base underscore arcade machine. There we go. Now that'll apply that texture to the object quite basically when we apply the material. Just going to highlight all this and hit Q to straighten it up. Going to hit apply and save. Then minimize that. We'll go back to content, into mesh, and then we're going to open up the arcade cabinet. And on the top right here, we're going to change the material to m_arcade machine, like that. We're going to hit save. We're just going to make sure that that's saved. It didn't look like it did. We'll close these now, and we can drag the arcade machine out into the scene with the texture applied. We'll just turn it into the sunlight a little so we can see better. And there we have it, one textured arcade machine. So now that we've achieved this with this model, we're going to hit save, and then we'll move over back into 3ds Max to do the same with the modified version. Now to texture this model, we're going to take a slightly different approach, and we're going to create an ID map. What we want to do is open the materials editor, and we're going to switch over to the compact materials editor. And what we're going to do is click this little box here and search for a multi-sub-object. And hit OK. Yep, OK. So all I'm going to do is drag this out a touch just to give us a bit more space to see what's going on here. And we're going to set the number of materials to 3. Is that correct? 1, 2, 3. We want 4. No, we can manage with 3. We can do with 3. So then we're going to go into the material, and we're going to change this to. We want standard legacy, but it's not there, so we need to do something first. So what we need to do is go into rendering, render setup. And we need to change out of Arnold to Scanline Renderer, and then we should be able to find, yeah, standard legacy. There we go. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to give this a self-illumination of 100, and give it a colour, and we're going to set this one to red. Okay, then we're going to go to the parent of this, and then we're going to hold shift and copy this down, and do the same again. Okay, and just going to go back into this, set this to red as well. Okay, then back to the parent, then for this one we're going to go green. Like that. And the same here, we want green. Okay. And back to the parent, and for this one we want blue. And back to parent. We're then going to take this material and we're going to drag it onto the model. And now what we want to do is, I'm just going to move this over here in case I need it again. Go into Poly and select all, and then we can set the material IDs to 1. And that will just be using the first channel of the material that we've created here. Okay, so I'm now going to select by angle. I'm going to take, oh, too much of an angle. Set the angle maybe to 20. There we go, just that outer edge. Just double check around this. Yeah, we're good. I'm going to do the same on this side and grow the selection. That's taken a nice part of the sides there. I might even, if I control select that too, that'll take the inner trim of that, because we're going to want that using the same material as the outside. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And then we're going to go to the ID, we're going to set that to 2. Now, I may have overshot here a little bit, because I think what we want to do is take this face along with this one to make that look like one piece. Like that. Then we're going to take these strips at the side of the screen all the way up. Oh. And I'm going to turn off by angle for these last couple. I'm going to set that ID to 3. And that's most of it, but we're going to need a couple of extra IDs for the button pieces and the joysticks, so we'll set them up now. So we'll just work out how many we need. We're going to want 2 separate colours for the buttons, really. So that'll be 5. 6 with the bases of the joystick, 7 with the tips, and 8 including the screen, so we'll set the number to 8. Okay. Okay, so I've set up some more ID channels to use, and we're going to apply these now. So we're going to select element to start with, and select all of these buttons. In fact, no, we'll do the screen first. It makes sense to get the screen done with the rest of the model here. So to start with, we're going to set the ID for the screen to 4, and that will be using the yellow material that I set up here. Now I'm going to jump over into Element. I'm going to select the first set of buttons, hold down Control on the keyboard and select Polygon. I'm going to set the ID for these to 5. I'm going to jump back into Element and start selecting the other buttons. Hold Control on the keyboard and select Polygon. I'm going to set the ID on these to 6. Once again, over into Select Element. I'm going to do the same for the joysticks. The bases and the handles should be the same material. Again, Control, select Polygon. The ID for this one will be 7. Then finally, into Polygon again. We'll select the tips of the joysticks. The colours are a little bit close between the yellow and the orange. Might have to address that in the map here, but we'll just finish assigning everything first. So again, Control click Polygon. We'll set the IDs here to 8, which is a desaturated purple or magenta. And we now have all of the separate surfaces for the model set up with their own IDs. Okay, so now I'm going to close this. I'm going to go rendering and render to texture. We want to select use existing channel for channel 1, the mapping channel that we've set up. We're then going to add a diffuse map, and we're then going to set the resolution to 2048 by 2048. And we're going to go back up here and give it a padding of 16. These are all settings advised by my lecturer, so all of this should work. We'll see what happens. Okay, and now we're going to hit render. We're going to hit continue, and that will give us an ID map for, if I just make this the right size, this will give us an ID map for the model. So with this generated now, we're going to save this out, and we're going to call this ID map arcade machine, and hit save. We're going to want to save that as JPEG. Hit save. Quality best. Okay. And that should have exported out. I'll just find it in the documents now. And here we have the exported ID map that we can now pull into Photoshop. So we'll jump on over to Photoshop now. So now that we've got Photoshop open, we can drag this ID map in. And we know that scaling's right because we set this to be 2048 by 2048 when we rendered it out. So what we're going to do is double click on the background, turn this into layer 1. I'm going to create a new layer and make this the new layer 0. We're going to fill this to be black. You can see it's changed over here, just in case we decide to erase anything. Now we can use layer 1 and we can start colouring in the model. So I'm going to go about with the paint bucket tool and set colours. I'll talk through the first one to find a nice maybe a nice purplish colour would be interesting, because I don't need to follow any guidance for this. This is something that we're doing beyond the scope of the project. And we can start to fill these parts in. You can see that it's going to miss the occasional parts, but we can zoom right in here and we can just get those like this. Okay, for the trims I'm going to do a darker purple. So now that we've got that laid out, we'll start looking at bringing in some decals. Now what we'll do, because we've lost a lot of the detail for the UV, we'll also bring in the UVW template that we rendered out before, so that we can get those lines back. So we'll start off with that. We'll bring in the modified UV template, we'll drop that behind, and we'll just rename this UVW template, and then we can drop the opacity on this layer until we can see it, and this will help us when we're laying out the decals. Same as before, I'll be using 3ds Max to identify which part of the machine is which. So I'm going to start with the right side of the cabinet with this decal. I'm going to drag it into position and scale it up a bit. And I think I'm going to give it a little bit of rotation. Set that nicely at the side. going to rasterize the layer, and I will cut this part away. So layer via cut. I'm just going to delete that layer. I'm going to call this logo 1 because that's my nebula skull logo. And I'm going to lower the opacity on this because I feel like it just looks that little bit better when it's faded in with this logo in particular. So I'm going to set 40% on that. So next I'm going to pull in the logo for the other side, scale it up about the same size, yeah, that should do. We'll rotate it a touch more just so that we're about the same there. Then I'm going to go up to Edit, Transform, and flip horizontal, I believe. Yeah, horizontal. And we'll position this in a nice place again. Then we're going to rasterize the layer. And marquee select the back, just to cut it away so it doesn't cross over onto the other side. Layer via cut, and we'll delete that layer. And we'll call this logo 2. Again, we'll set the opacity to 40%. Okay, so next I'm going to bring in a bannered circular logo for the front of the machine. I'm going to put that fairly high up at the front there. Okay, so next I've got this banner, which we're going to drop in to put on the front of the arcade cabinet, both at the top and at the front of the controls. So I'm just going to shrink this down, move it into place, zoom in so we can do this right. That'll sit nicely there. And then we're going to duplicate the layer. I'm going to take that duplicated layer and press the wrong thing. That's what I'm going to do. So, try that again. Duplicate layer. Then I'm going to select the duplicate. I'm going to shrink it down until it fits nicely in this little section here. Just use the keys on the keyboard to align that as we want it. Okay. Now the last thing we want to do is put the screen in. I've taken a screenshot from a project I've been working on outside of university, so we'll just position that in now. I'm just going to drop the opacity on this so that we can see through it. We're going to scale it down, bring it in as close as we can get it. See how this looks if we stretch it. what's going on there. So I'm going to undo too much, that's what I'm going to do. I'll just pause the video and fix that. Okay, so we'll pull this image back in. And I'm going to shrink it down. But the main focus of this is the rabbit. So I can afford to let some of this be off the screen. What I'm also going to do is, because this was a screenshot in Unreal Engine, I didn't hide the gizmo in the corner. So I'm just going to marquee select that. Create a new layer at the top of the stack. And I'm just going to fill this, just sample the black next to it and fill this in black. So now we'll go through everything and just make sure that the opacity is turned up where we'd like it to be. These logos we actually want at 40% opacity, but this layer we want at 100. And now we can export this out. So we'll go to File, Export, Export as PNG, and we'll save it in here where I've been saving everything else. We'll call this T_base _ arcade machine modified. We'll save that. And now we'll jump over into Unreal Engine and we'll see what the texture looks like. But first of all, we'll bring 3ds Max back and resize all my screens because everything messes up when I switch monitors. And we'll just bring in the UV map as well, and we'll close this. And now we'll collapse all. Yes. And we're going to... That's why it looked weird. My Scene Explorer had shrunk. So now we're going to export. Okay, so now that we've found a location for it, we already have the one that we created earlier in the video, so I'm going to select that because we want a very similar name to it. And just before the AT2, Assess Tutorial 2, we're going to put modified so that we know this is the modified version. We're going to save that. Ensure smoothing groups is ticked. Hit OK. And now we can jump over to Unreal Engine. So now that we're in Unreal Engine, where we left it, we want to pull in the new files that we've created. So we've got the arcade cabinet modified. We're going to hit import for that. And we've got the new texture that we've created. Now we want to pull the cabinet itself into mesh, because that's where we're keeping it. And we want to take the texture, and if we open up on the left side here where we've got materials and we've got textures, so we can just drag it straight into textures there. Okay. Now we're going to go into mesh and we'll pull one of these into the scene to start with. We'll rotate it the same orientation as that one, so we can see what we're looking at. And we'll go back to the content and into materials, and we're going to create a new material. This is going to be M_arcade machine modified. I'm going to open that ready to do what we need to do. I mean, we don't actually need to check on the texture, we know it's there. So we're going to get a texture sample. Then we want a texture object. And then we want to search for T underscore base underscore arcade machine, and it's arcade machine modified. Just grab all this and hit Q to straighten things up. We'll apply and we'll save. Now we can minimise this again. We can jump back into content and go to mesh and open up the modified arcade cabinet. We can select that material over here so it's saved to the model. So we'll be looking for M underscore arcade machine modified, and you can see it applies the texture to it. But we'll have a look at that actually inside Unreal rather than in this view. Close this now, and as you can see we've got the texture set for the modified version of the arcade cabinet. That concludes Assess Tutorials 4 and 5. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.